Hello and welcome to another episode of the DigiTeacher. This week I'd like to look at an article that came out in 1986 by Ursula Le Guin and what this has to tell us about educational technology in the English classroom. When we think about educational technology, we often think about the tool, particularly digital tools. So we think about computers and iPads, interactive whiteboards, the internet and that kind of thing. A few decades before, we were thinking about film in the classroom, and before that radio in the classroom, and before that the introduction of pen and paper. So we often forget that educational technologies are not just the tools, they're also the techniques and processes. So in agriculture, for example, crop rotation is a technology. Even though it doesn't necessarily involve a tool directly. It's a process, it's a technique, a way of doing things. Pedagogy, therefore, is also an educational technology. So, what about this article by Ursula Le Guin? When I read it, it kind of blew my mind because it opened up a whole new area for examining literature. And it opened up a technology for examining literature, which is obviously, quite an earth-shattering moment. So let's have a look at the article and see what it's saying. It's called The Carrier Bag Theory of Fiction, and you can freely search this, Google it, and you'll find PDF copies freely available on the internet. But it sets out a rival view to the structure of narrative presented, for example, by Aristotle in the Poetics. So let's go through this argument. What was Aristotle's argument and what is Le Guin's argument? So my understanding of what Aristotle is saying, and I'm not an expert in this at all, is that Aristotle isn't really interested in character in the same way as, for example, Jane Austen is interested in character and character development. His view of tragedy and of the highest form of art is that human actions, human tragedy is present in the actions. It's in the plot, the ends, the results of human actions that are vitally important. So Aristotle's notions about plot and plot development are absolutely crucial to understanding, the nature of literature, the highest forms of literature. He's not saying that character is not important, but that is it's a lesser concern in literature. So you get this notion of rising and falling action. So I think the way this is translated into teaching is that when we teach a narrative, when we teach a novel and so forth, we look at things like the setting. We look at how the characters are introduced, how the setting is introduced. We look at then what happens, the impulse, the thing that gets the story moving, and then the development. And the development, as things unfold, forms the rising action, and it rises to a climax. Whatever is going to happen in the story happens. And then you get the falling action, the denouement, the conclusion of the story, where loose ends are tied up and so on. So it's that idea of rising and falling action with a set climax. Something is going to happen in the story, and the story is about how it happens. It's about the actions and the results of those actions and what it tells us about humans and life in general. So that's a kind of, in very broad terms, and I'm totally glossing over all kinds of things, but for me that's what we normally take into the classroom when we're teaching narrative. We're looking at concerns like the setting, and we're looking at the development of the plot, and we're looking particularly at climax, and we're looking at how things are wrapped up. The story goes somewhere. Ursula Le Guin presents a different argument. She says that, and she kind of takes a kind of mythological, anthropological archaeological kind of view. She looks back to a kind of time immemorial, a time from long ago, and she said men and women told stories differently. And this basically is the kind of her argument in the article. She says, men were largely responsible for hunting, and I'm not sure that the archaeological record is bearing this up. We know that women were involved in hunting, and things may not be as gender clear-cut as they're often represented, but nevertheless she presents this as a thought experiment. So you've got the hunter. The hunter comes back from the hunt, and they've got a story to tell. And the story has a point, just like the point of the spear that's used in the hunt. The story has a point. There's a beginning, an introduction, a setting of the story. Things develop, how the hunt unfolded, who went where, who was doing what, and then the point, which is presumably either the kill or the failure to kill. It's the story, the one that got away, or it's the story about the animal that was killed. Or maybe it's the story about how Ugg got a spear in his buttock, and all of that, a sort of tragicomedy, if you like. So stories have that kind of rising and falling action. It rises to a point, a climax. The story is about something. Gathering, which Ursula Le Guin says is synonymous with women, is very different. There's no real climax to a gathering story. You go about your business gathering berries and grasses and whatever you can find, and it happens throughout the day. And you might have a particularly rich find, but that's not the point of the story. The point of the story, she says, lies in the kind of incidents and things that you notice during the course of the day. So while crossing the stream, a child notices its reflection, and the whole group stops for a while and laughs or jokes about the reflection, plays with the water, sees how the ripples in the water affect things. You're climbing a tree and you notice how the branches are spreading and how there's a particularly big tree, and you get the fruit from the tree. But that's not a real climax to the story, because further down the path you're going to find a rich find of roots that you dig up. So there's no single point to that narrative. When you get back, you might, around the campfire, you might reflect on those incidental discoveries along the way, the puddle of water, the reflection in the water, and all the events of the day, how the sun was rising over the cliffs and so on. So narrative has a very different structure. It's not about a point. It doesn't rise to a climax. It's a stitching together, a carrier bag, if you like, of different experiences along the way. And the story is the experiences that you had along the way. And that represents a very different way of looking at narrative, a very different way of looking at the novel or the play, and so on. So it represents a different educational technology to unlock experiences in literature. So in the article, Le Guin presents us with a picture of dethroning the hero. In the Aristotelian story, you have a hero, a tragic hero whose actions bring them down. There may be character flaws, but essentially it's their actions that bring them down. And she presents this here as the kind of looking at a spear hitting its mark. It goes thwack into the target, and the hero wins or loses, and that's the point of the story. In the carrier bag theory of narrative, everything is a collection of items, of curiosities, of experiences, and of observations that goes into the bag, and that bag forms the story. And the hero is then reduced to just a simple part of the story. She's got a lovely passage here when she says, finally it's clear that the hero does not look well in this bag. He sees he needs a stage or a pedestal or a pinnacle. We put him in a bag and he looks like a rabbit, like a potato. He becomes just a curiosity, another aspect. So in her stories, she says, instead of heroes, we have people in them. Her stories are full of people rather than individual heroes, each living out a larger story. In the past, I've certainly used the Aristotelian model to help me unpack novels, to use it as a tool, an educational technology for understanding literature. I've looked at setting, tried to unpack how the setting is explicated, looked at the impulse, what is it that gets the story moving, look at the various developments, how the development unfolds, particularly in character development, and then the climax of the story. Whatever's going to happen happens. Try to identify anticlimaxes, and of course the denouement. So I've certainly used the Aristotelian model of literature, of narrative, as an educational technology when looking at the novel. I think a very exciting aspect of Ursula Le Guin's article is it opens up a different way of unpacking a novel and helping a class to understand a novel. So we had a class do Mrs. Dalloway as a home reader, and I think the exciting thing about the narrative structure of Mrs. Dalloway is the way it explores time and space through head hopping. So you will follow one character geographically through the streets of London and through time, through the course of a morning, and then you'll hop into another person's head, and it'll kind of reverse direction, go to another part of the city, and more time will develop, and the narrative is advanced, but through the experiences, the thoughts, the feelings of another character. And so almost the totality of the city is explored, and different people's motivations and different people's progress through time and through the city over the course of a couple of days is explored in very interesting ways. And I think the carrier bag theory of literature helps us to understand that novel far better than an Aristotelian model would. So I think it's a very useful tool to present to students. You've got this model of narrative, you've got that model of narrative. Which one helps us to understand the novel better? And obviously there's going to be elements of both that you can explore as a class in very interesting ways. So I think this is a very exciting tool for unpacking and understanding literature, which I certainly haven't seen being used before. I only recently was exposed to this article, and I'm very grateful to my son for bringing it to my attention. So I hope that you found this useful. Go away and read the article, and I hope it inspires you to bring it into your literature lessons, to your English classes. If you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, hit the notification bell, and please leave comments so that we can take this conversation a little bit further. And make sure that you never miss another episode of the DigiTeacher.